Hi, I'm Loretta, and I'm really glad that you showed up today. Welcome to my sewing room.
Hi fellow quilters. What I'm going to do today is we're going to move on to part 3 of the Eldon block, and we're going to inset the log cabins that we pieced last time in with the star that we pieced in the first video. So I am going to show you how to get started with that. My star block is all nicely pressed. My log cabin blocks are pressed and trimmed, and I have stitched this together, leaving my seam open at the end. I've sewn right up to that dot that we made, and left the remainder of the seam open. There's a back stitch right there too to make sure that that is well secured. So let's get started. Okay, here we are at the machine. Here's my star block, the first log cabin that I'm going to insert. We have the light section of the log cabin pointing inward toward the star block. I'm going to start by piecing this left-hand seam, and then we'll do this seam down here. So the way to do this is you want to fold this half of the star over like this, and then pull this point down, and that leaves this section here exposed. That's where our first seam will be. I'm going to lay this log cabin right sides together, and I'm going to take just 3 pins. I'm going to take one pin and run it through the dot that's on the corner of this log cabin. Then I'm going to run it through the dot that is at the edge of the star point. That'll bring those 2 dots together. Push the pin through. Now we'll do the same thing down here. I have a dot right here and a dot where my seam ended. Same thing, going to make sure those are well aligned and push the pin through. I'm going to take the 3rd pin, and somewhere in the middle here I'm going to put that through like that. I have my machine set up. My dual feed foot is not in yet at the dealer, so I'm still having to piece using my 20C foot and moving my needle 5 spaces to the right. I'm going to stitch this with a 1.9 stitch length. And we're going to put the presser foot down. And first I'm going to back stitch right to that dot. Get my pin out of there. Make sure my raw edges are aligned. Remove my pins as I get to them. Back stitch at the end, stopping at that dot. Use my thread cutter, cut my threads. So there's the first half of getting that log cabin block inserted. So then the next seam is going to be this seam. I'm going to do the same thing, pin through the dot, pin through the dot, line those up and put the pin through that way. Same thing down here, pin through the dot on the back side, and then again just along the center somewhere here. I'm going to do the same thing. Oops, my needle came unthreaded. Press our foot down, back stitch to the dot, there we go. Underneath, you just want to check and make sure everything's out of the way. Flip this bottom seam away from the log cabin block. Again, make sure you backstitch. And there we have the very first log cabin block stitched into in a Y-seam. The Y-seams are really not difficult. You just have to take it slow. Make sure your dots are well marked so that you can come right to them and stop. Don't go past it. It's better to be one stitch shy of that mark than to overshoot it. And now we're just going to continue on and piece the rest of these. There's my second one. Make sure that the light log cabin bars are toward the center of your star block. Going to do the same thing. Just line up the blue dots with the on the star and on the log cabin. This gets just a little bit trickier as you add more log cabin blocks, just because you want to make sure that the one you've previously sewn on is not getting in the way of the seam that you're currently stitching. So if you fold this star block in half like this, fold this point down, make sure everything is nice and flat. I like to make sure my log cabin block is on top of that star block. I don't have this folded quite in half like I want it. If there's anything out of place beneath, just you're wanting to make sure those raw edges are all lined up. Don't forget to backstitch. Then open it up like that. Flip this half over onto that log cabin block, and again use your dots and a pin to make sure that everything is aligned properly. I always sew these from the tip of the star to the center. Again, underneath, I'm going to make sure this seam is flipped down so it doesn't get in the way. I don't want to cross over any of those seams. Okay, there's that one. I backstitched a few stitches. Now I'm going to go forward. Check underneath, make sure that seam is still flipped down. Hold it in place firmly. Open it up and it lays nice and flat. On to the next one. You do have to be a little careful. This is all a bias edge right here where those strips come together on the pieced star. Make sure your seam is out of the way on the back side. I'm going to get my stiletto out and use it to help position these. And you only need just 2 or 3 back stitches. It doesn't hurt to put more in, but all it really needs is just 2 or 3. Flip it over, make sure that there's nothing in the way down here. I'm just going to flip that over. I'm checking underneath. I'm going to flip this seam out of the way completely. And there's that one. You can see the blue dots here where they all come together. This is water soluble marking pen, so that will just come right out with a spritz of water. And I am going to finish putting these in, and then we'll come back and I will cut the diamond shapes that fit into the corner here between the log cabins, and that's another Y seam that meets right here. So if you're finding this information helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Okay, I'm ready to put the last one in. There's really no different process here. Put your pin in there. One down at the bottom, making sure you're not going through a seam allowance, just one layer of fabric. Well, two, the log cabin and the star, but nothing in the back here is caught. And the third one in the center, and that just keeps the seam straighter, keeps the raw edges aligned better. And then I can fold this along this line and then pull this out of the way. I lay the log cabin on top there. I slow down as I'm approaching the seam, and I lift up to make sure there's no seam allowances in the way, nothing that's going to get caught there that shouldn't be. Double check underneath, make sure my seam allowance is pushed this direction. Okay, there is the star with all 8 log cabins, and now we're going to go press it, and I'll also cut those diamonds, the background diamonds that will fit in around these log cabin blocks. So over to the ironing station. Okay, here we are with all those log cabin blocks pieced in nicely. You can see how flat this block lays. And now I'm going to press it. I try to press things, the seams toward the log cabins, but down in the point here, sometimes it wants to push back toward the star, which is totally fine. I just want it up here to be pushed out toward the log cabin. It keeps this point free up here. So I'm just gently pressing it, getting it all nice and flat. Okay, our block is all nicely pressed now. Nice and flat, it's looking really good. So next we'll move on to cutting the diamonds for the background. That'll get inset into in between each of those log cabin blocks. Okay, I have here a couple of pre-cut strips. The template, this is the same template that we used for the diamond sections of the 8-pointed star, and we're going to cut some diamonds. I have this fabric strip doubled so I can cut them 2 at a time. Just going to continue on lining up the raw edge that I previously cut. And if your strip gets off a little here on the edge, just bring this template in just a little bit and just cut a new straight line back here. I don't have quite enough fabric here to get 8. So I'm going to go on to my other strip so I can get all 8 diamonds that I need. And these diamonds also need to be marked with your dots in all 4 corners. Okay, all 8 of my background diamonds are marked, and I'm ready to go set these into the start block. So I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and we'll go on to that part. Okay, we're back at the sewing machine. Here's my block. I have my diamonds cut for the background, and now we're just going to piece those in. Again, I'll use 3 pins for each seam. And it's really just going to be the same thing. Put a pin through the dot there, a pin through the dot in the corner of the log cabin block. Come down to the other end, do the same. Again, you're going to make sure you don't have anything in the way in the back, making sure that that seam allowance is out of the way. Whoops. Pin in the center and do the exact same thing. I'm going to just make sure that all of this seam allowance underneath is out of the way, folded out of the way. I'm going to start with back stitching. Making sure everything is out of the way in the back here. Just going to stitch right up to that dot. Back stitch, cut my threads, and then this is going to just spin around here and meet up nicely with this next log cabin piece. Again, you have bias edges here, so be careful not to stretch them. I'm looking at the back side, making sure everything's out of the way. And one pin in the middle to keep it all straight. So I'm making sure that that seam allowance back there is completely out of the way. Back stitch. Oops, I accidentally hit my cut thread button instead of my backstitch button. So I'm going to come back a little bit, restitch the last part of that seam, backstitch, and then cut. there's the first background diamond put in place. So I'm going to go ahead and piece the rest of these, and then I'll show you the finished block when we're done. These Y seams can be just a little fiddly, but if you take your time, go slow your machine down if you can, so you don't accidentally go too fast and overshoot your mark. But as long as you're careful to do things like make sure the seam allowance on the back side is out of the way, carefully pin each of these points where your little dots meet, and then make sure you don't go past the dot as you're sewing your seam, and backstitch at each one. So it takes a little bit of time, more so than your quick strip piecing would, but the results are worth it. And once you get through making several of these blocks, you really will be an expert at doing Y seams. And once you get used to doing them, they're just really not that big of a deal. So I'll see you back at the ironing station when I get all of these 8 background diamonds inset. These are a little easier to sew than the log cabin blocks because this isn't a 90-degree angle here. So it's a little bit easier of a Y seam because it's easier to keep that extra pieces of seam allowance on the backside away from where you're stitching. Okay, we've pieced all 8 background diamonds in, and I will press it back at the pressing station and we'll see what the finished block looks like. Okay, here we are back at the iron, and now I'm just going to press these seams toward these outside diamonds. Okay, there is the completely assembled and pressed block. These are a pretty large block, and you do have some bias edges here on the edge, so carefully keep these put away until you get all your blocks made and are ready to do final assembly. I have a few more blocks to make, and then what I'll do is just in a small sample 4-block wall hanging, I'll show you how to sew these together in rows, and the rows are also going to have Y seams in them. But once you get all your blocks made, you'll be an expert at doing those Y seams. So until next time, here is one finished Eldon block. I'm going to do 3 more, and there's going to be one center log cabin square that I'll also use in the wall hanging. And we'll see you back here in a couple weeks. And please like, share, and subscribe. Hope you find this helpful, and hope you enjoy these videos as much as I enjoy making them. Thank you very much.